Welcome to the Shipping Podcast, where I meet interesting maritime professionals sharing their passion for the shipping industry and their everyday job. I am your host. My name is Lena Gothberg. Blockchain. This episode is about blockchain. When I went to Copenhagen in January, I had booked my meetings with Anne Steffensen, Christopher Rex, and Katja Rasmussen, the episodes that you have listened to already. I had got a tip about a woman who's an expert on 3D printing and the implications of that in the maritime industry, and that was Marta Renberg, who is the guest in episode 59. She agreed to see me, and when talking to her, I asked her if she knew anyone expert on blockchain. Because I'd heard about that buzzword for a while, I didn't really know what it's all about. Marta took out her mobile and called one of her friends, CEO and co-founder of BLOC, that is Blockchain Research and Application Development Company, BLOC, which has a mission to help create the demand for a decentralized global economy. Deanna MacDonald. Deanna agreed to see me without any hesitation, if I could be there in half an hour. I got a taxi and went through the town only to enter into a co-working space dedicated to fintech entrepreneurs and a smiling Deanna MacDonald, a young woman who knows everything about blockchain, and she welcomed me into her world. So in this 60-second episode of the Shipping Podcast, which was recorded on January the 25th, you will hear Deanna explain this complex system in a very simple fashion, which I hope would give you an insight to what's on everyone's lips today, namely blockchain. Welcome to the Shipping Podcast. Could you please introduce yourself?
My name is Deanna MacDonald, and I'm a business technologist. I've been focused on the technology called blockchain for the last 3 years, and as of recently, I've helped to found a company called Blockchain Labs for Open Collaboration, focusing on creating co-creation of blockchain solutions and collaboration within the maritime industry.
So what is your background?
My background is, I come from a technology background in Canada, where I'm originally from, and I took my master's here in Copenhagen in international business and politics. So I kind of merged the political economist angle with the technologist angle and the business aspect as well. And in terms of my working background, I've also worked with medical technology and biotechnology and the governance of artificial intelligence. But I come from, generally speaking, how to make technology more accessible to the masses. And blockchain, when it came around, seemed to be the place I needed to be. So since then, I've been focusing solely on blockchain.
So could we have sort of a crash course on a blockchain for new beginners?
Definitely.
What is a blockchain?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one that a lot of people are asking. And I think it's a very abstract concept right now, so there's a lot of confusion that surrounds it. But the way I look at it and the way I like to talk about it is, first and foremost, maybe not as a technology, but as a certain type of logic or a concept that we're all starting to talk about. And then secondly, I like to talk about the implications of it. And in those two categories, to start, I guess the best way to describe it is that the world is independently creating a global digital ledger that would be shared amongst everybody and accessible by anybody with a key to this ledger. And what happens with digitizing anything of value is that we can now create what we call, in blockchain coders call tokens. But essentially, you can assign a token to anything of value that you put into this digital ledger. And you can trade these tokens, trade them amongst each other or in a global setting. And that facilitates a lot of transactions and a lot of business processes. And then behind all of that, if you're doing that and if you're transacting with each other on a global scale, you have to have trust in that technology. And furthermore, you have to have an assured process for doing so. So what blockchain, why it's so innovative, is there's just certain aspects that they've included in making these ledgers. And that is, the first one is that it's copied thousands of times around the world onto different computers. And that's maintained and updated in real time. So if you post a transaction to this digital ledger, all of the other computer nodes that are hosting this ledger are updated accordingly. And that transaction, once you post it, is cryptographically secured. So now there are 2 layers of security imposed upon your transactions, which is the first, cryptographic security. So if you tried to break into that, it would take a lot of work and hacking. But because it's then copied thousands of times all over the world, you would have to hack into every single one of those computers pretty much at the same time, or else they'll start to report inconsistencies. So it becomes one of the most secure places for transacting, which now when we talk about the implications, and if we're talking about transacting on a global scale, this essentially allows there to be trust in, for example, the app you're running on the phone, rather than the person that you're interacting with. So I don't necessarily need to know your name or who you are, but we can transact on a daily basis and pretty much with now anything of value. So what's happening is you're seeing documents being sent and validated on the blockchain, or you're seeing reputation tokens where if you've engaged in a service with another person and you weren't so trustworthy, that history stays with you forever, and those types of different interactions. And of course, money, we've seen Bitcoin blockchain come in. So that was the initial first revolution with blockchain, was creating an alternative cryptocurrency. And from there, I think it's just pretty much limitless. The main thing is that it's a distributed ledger that is accessible to the world and in the end, with a smartphone.
And how is that applicable to the maritime industry?
That's a good question as well. I think the main applicability that we're starting to see right now, and mind you, I'm quite new to the maritime industry. I've worked in many different sectors before, but my 3 co-founders are all from the maritime industry. So I take a lot of knowledge from them, and also from those that we've been interacting with a lot lately. And in the maritime industry, we found that the biggest applications, just to start, are going to be streamlining documentation and streamlining complex business processes. But from there are also implications beyond that, because with this type of technology, what you are essentially doing is creating a chain of custody. You're creating transparency with anything that you're putting into this digital ledger. Even if everybody can't see it because they don't have a key, those that are auditing or monitoring or sent to verify can see what's happening in your systems. So it creates essentially a really good level of provenance into our goods and our services. And I think then the implications of that in the maritime industry are going to be quite huge, because there are so many players, simply put, in that supply chain. So if everybody was able to plug into the same system, I think that'll be the biggest implication first and foremost, is that because this is a common database, a common ledger that everybody has access to, you don't need, hundreds of different softwares or technologies that are helping to try and link all through the chain. You can essentially just have one point of contact for everybody in the maritime industry. So if you start from that premise, I think most people in the industry could also think of, hundreds of applications for that as well.
Yeah, we are coming from pencil and paper. What comes to mind is the bill of lading, and it's all of that concerned with the cargo. But I think maybe other stuff could. Who am I actually to invent some applications? But I'm trying to take this down to an understandable level for people in the shipping industry.
Well, you're exactly right. I think who are you to make up applications? I think that's the point of blockchain. It's quite wonderful in that sense. It really is a ground-up collaborative initiative. So although it seems like it's a very complex technology, really what we're talking about is writing protocols and rules and encoding them into our systems, and into one system in particular. And from that kind of angle, basically, if there is something that someone dreams of or someone needs that they currently don't have, the likely possibility is that it can be encoded. And that's the first step. And when that happens, it can be essentially also put onto the blockchain. So I have quite a big mission in this area as well, in the maritime industry, where it's not necessarily known as the most technologically innovative sector to be in, but also
unless it's about the ship.
Yes, unless it's about the ship. That is absolutely correct. these systems and processes that exist outside of this hasn't necessarily been innovated in quite a long time. So with that in mind, and taking a very abstract and complex technology, my mission is exactly this, is to have these conversations where it's seen as more accessible, and where in a roundtable discussion, maritime actors are able to see the value in blockchain itself. And when you mentioned bill of lading, that's a great first application. I think when we talk of, if we don't even mention the word blockchain and we're talking of what would a perfect world in the maritime industry look like if we could digitize documents, for example, I think there's a very easily seen advantage there that a lot of people are trying to tap into. And there are blockchain experts right now that are in companies that are starting up working with bill of lading and trying to digitize that. But what I've really come to see more recently, and where I think that this is heading, is that if we are streamlining all of our information and data into one source, creating essentially big data for the shipping industry, you can build the layers and the applications on top of that. But if we have a big pool of data, what I think might start happening is that we're going to see a lot less need for something like a bill of lading and third level kind of documents. We're going to have a one-stop source for everything. And when it comes to that, I mean, these figures vary, but there's something like 14 people in a usual transaction in maritime, and then about 22, and I've heard 30 documents per cargo container. And if we are able to eliminate that, I think the business process gains and benefits alone are quite huge, quite substantial.
So this is targeting the processes within the industry. We're not talking digitalization about following the cargo to see where the cargo is. It's more like the process. Am I correct then?
Yes, for sure, as a starting point. And then, so when we move from, I think essentially digitization will be the first move, because I think most of these, all of these documents need to be put somewhere. But furthermore, anything that we're dealing with first has to be digitized. And that would be part of the process. But from there, it becomes a question of really, what are you going to do with that? So now we've got a system that is immutable, which means it can't be changed. No one can hack into it. We know that the data is safe. And we have a transparent system on top of that. And then behind that, we have a decentralized system. So everything is spread out amongst all of the parties. Everybody essentially can have access to that same information. So when we talk about chain of custody, and we talk about tracking and verifying and monitoring of the different goods, services, cargo, ships, paper, now which would be digitized paper, but documents, it becomes a lot easier to monitor, to track and trace all of this. So basically, if you have this pool of everything, the sky's the limit as to what people will create out of it. And there's quite interesting and innovative approaches that are being taken right now as well. And they vary and range from, bill of lading to digital identity for smaller shipping companies to have trust in being able to enter into the supply chain with less of with being verified rather than having to go through certain processes that currently exist, to having tracking cargo containers, to having, for example, a one-stop port customs window instead of having multiple systems existing all over the world, having just able to create automated compliance, for example, in the customs and in regulations. So the applications are just endless, essentially.
It's exploding now.
It is.
We got the foundation. Is shipping the last part of the supply chain that is jumping on the train with blockchain?
Actually, I think it might be one of the first movers, and that's very cool. That's something that you don't see too often happening in this industry. So with that being said, I think that in the future, it might be that the maritime industry was helping to create the first steps in true adoption of blockchain on a global scale. I'm really excited to see that. And I know that it's also not necessarily all actors and all players in the maritime industry that are doing this. Obviously, it's a huge sector. But that being said, the key players are definitely looking into it. And because this is a ground up kind of movement, it really only takes, 4 guys to be able to create a system like this that can be implemented in the entire industry. And that we are seeing. So I think it will in the end be perhaps a first mover in terms of blockchain technology.
Cool.
Yeah.
Finally.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. It's a good place to be in.
Yeah, but I mean, shipping is a global thing, so it has to be a system that works globally. I understand that the banks are also looking into this or being a bit threatened maybe from the blockchain, and they are global. So it's interesting. I know also about people who are looking into it. It has to be somewhere where you can exchange information and know that it's safe and all of that.
Definitely.
So how do you see the shipping industry? You just sort of walked into the maritime industry.
Mm-hmm.
How do you find it?
So far, it's pretty great, and I know that I'm also in a good position, being that this tends to be something that people are gravitating towards. So I have less of a push and more of a pull, and I think that's quite unique when you step into the maritime industry, unless you're amongst the bigger players. But that being said, from my early observations, having just been in it for a while now, I think there is a great willingness to innovate and to change. And I feel as though there's a momentum within the maritime industry that I really hope to capitalize on. And it's kind of aligned with the movement of blockchain itself as well, which is to say that there has to be a better way to go forward. And, there are instances where the maritime industry or where shipping companies get blamed for a lot of what's happening with our oceans and with what's going on in the environment. But that being said, they understand their responsibility, and that's a great first start. So although I haven't been in the industry for long at all, but I feel like there's room to grow, there's room to move, and and I'm very inspired by it so far, to be honest. I mean, I've also had the privilege of having 3 great co-founders that know inspiring people. So I haven't had to come in and navigate myself. But that being said, everybody that I've interacted with so far, unless, of course I could be naive and I could be being tricked in some grand way, but that would, I think, not necessarily be the case. I think it's so far so good. But as to how the maritime industry will look, I mean, the biggest thing I really truly believe will happen at one point is the streamlining of, like you were just saying, of a global industry. It touches and affects so many people all over the world. And unless they're able to communicate with each other and interact with each other and have verified processes in place or verified contact points with each other throughout this chain, then we simply won't be able to go into the next generation or the next digital age. And if that's the case, people are going to likely find alternative means in this area. Because if we're able to start innovating with, for example, 3D printing and blockchain to be able to establish chain of custodies and transactions with each other, I know that it can't necessarily replace the grandness of the maritime industry, but we also would probably be able to set up a new type of system and replace it if it weren't that they were on board. So I think in the end, this will be something that changes the industry. And in that sense, it might not even be that we talk about blockchain, more so that we talk about what does an inclusive and an accessible and a transparent industry look like.
I'm so pleased that the maritime industry has shown you how great we are. Because usually we are called the hidden industry. No one knows about us. So we want to show the world how great we are and the people who are in there and who's got the shipping bug. How do you think we could become more visible? You met some people who were introducing you into the industry, but how do you think we could become more visible?
Well, I think there's quite a few initiatives that are underway that soon will probably become quite visible, if not for the very simple reason that blockchain is really hyped right now. So we also take advantage of being able to ride that hype wave. Discerning between what is smoke and mirrors and what is real groundwork projects can sometimes be difficult. But so far what I've seen is that a lot of the applications that are starting to arise in the maritime industry are really going to make a difference. And in that respect, I think they'll start speaking for themselves, especially when it comes to the entire world, the tech world at the very least, but the world looking at blockchain, like you mentioned earlier, banks being scared. They're investing billions. And if they turned around and saw that the maritime industry had maybe under the table snuck in some great blockchain solutions and is benefiting from it. Actually, it might be one of the more subtle approaches I've seen, because generally speaking, those that are getting involved in blockchain are announcing it right away. They're, making a website and doing all the press releases possible to say that they are here, they are in this industry. Whereas a maritime, generally more cautious industry in and of itself, has taken a more subtle approach. And in the end, what I do see happening is the rise of some very innovative blockchain solutions, and that's going to make the industry visible. And on the other hand, I think there's discussions that are taking place that haven't before taken place in this sector in terms of transparency and chain of custody and accessibility. And those types of conversations are really starting to pick up. And when that happens, then the world also will start turning towards that sector, because if there's any hot topics to be talked about these days, these are them. So there's two aspects. One is that they're concretely building some solutions in this space, in the blockchain space. And secondly, the conversations as a result are also, I think, going to gain some good credibility.
I hope you're right.
I mean, I'm an idealist in some ways and a dreamer in others, but...
No, but it's interesting to talk to someone who is looking upon the industry from the outside, because I'm already smitten. I've been here for too long. I've been here for 25 years. But still, I can see all the new things coming up. And so it's great. You are confirming what I think.
Great.
In a way. Yeah. Who do you think I should meet the next time? Who should be interviewed on the Shipping Podcast, do you think?
Well, there's a lot of great stuff coming in from many different angles. And I think a lot of my idealism here comes from the conversations I've been having as well. And just with you, even to be having been in this industry for 25 years and still smitten with it is a good example. And I've been having more conversations with those that are in this space that also just are impassioned and really ready for this change. And in that sense, there's been some great work coming out of Maritime Transport International. They haven't yet released what they're doing, but at the same time, I think it's been in the media that they're starting to work with blockchain and that they're applying some certain elements of blockchain to their processes. And that's, I think, going to be a really great company to talk to once they do release their application there. And then on top of that, if it's not even necessarily blockchain, creators and makers, of which there are quite a few, but then there are a lot of companies that are being first movers in adopting the technology as well. And that is we've been talking with different ports. There's quite a few ports and authority figures that are seeing the value in automated compliance and being able to regulate the industry in a more technologically advanced way. And we're also seeing a lot of bunker operators, believe it or not. I mean, that's been a very big challenge in this industry, as well as the fraud and corruption in the bunker industry. So there's quite a lot of them coming forward and wanting to eradicate that. And given the trust and transparency in this technology, it seems as a good route for them. So really, I could just essentially make a mapping of the supply chain right now and probably give you one player or one actor in all of the areas, because we've had conversations with almost all of them, all of the different actors in the different roles.
That's interesting. And I think the shipping industry or the maritime industry needs to hear that. I try and find the people who are forerunners and who are going to make a change to us in a positive way. Because I think we need to understand that there are so many people who are afraid of technical innovation or afraid of what's happening now and how will that impact me as a person and so on. And I am trying to calm them down. Because, all innovation is not dangerous. It could actually make things better.
It's true. I do have a concern that has been growing lately, and that is with blockchain, when you have validation processes or when you have verification steps already built into the technology. So, for example, if you put a document or information into a document online and you're the starting point of this process, and the next person gets your cargo, confirms that, yes, this is in fact what they are shipping, and then adds their additional details to it, and that gets passed to the next person. You're essentially creating the validation points into this chain, and it is a digital process. That being said, if there are 14 people associated with every transaction, that's a lot of middlemen to be getting rid of. So what's happening is we're, creating a disintermediation and kind of ridding of the third-party verification and third-party runners with documents, paper documents, and that's going to affect a lot of people. That being said, if we're replacing that process with a smartphone instead of a piece of paper, that's already a good enough switch, and their jobs will still be protected. But considering their middlemen are what predominantly make up the maritime industry, I think it'll be a very interesting challenge to have to try to figure out how to best accommodate this population without disrupting it in a negative way. We don't necessarily need to, streamline to a point of efficiency that we don't have people. That's always going to be needed. So you're hitting it right at the crux of where I truly think there's going to be the major challenge of adoption, which is how do we communicate this not as a risk, but more so as a change in the everyday processes or a change in the way we do things rather than a replacement in people and in roles.
Yeah, it won't help to just sit and try and not hear what's happening outside my own little box. You have to be on top of that to be the one that is going to be there in the industry and not the one who's going to be the middleman cut out, I think.
Good point. If you want to be represented, then just come to the table and talk about it so that you aren't forgotten, I think is a good point.
Because it's a cultural behavior, maybe, to try and not to listen to the new stuff happening, because if I just duck this one, I can sit it out and then it won't affect me. And I think that is also a mindset we need to change. Do you think the disruption will come from the inside or the outside of the industry?
It's hard to say, really. Right now, I think from the inside, from what I'm seeing, I think that there are really innovative players that are taking chances and risks and setting up, their ideal version of what the industry should look like. And they're building that up on consensus as well. There's a lot of stakeholders involved. And because there are so many players that are, in a sense, involved in this, I think that'll be the real game changer. But that being said, due to the new regulations coming in, with even the EU monitoring, reporting, and verification for emissions, and with the pressure that's being, I think, given or put onto the maritime industry, I think there'll be a combination of both the disruption from within that causes others to, really turn their heads and pay attention. And then there will also be quite a bit of external pressure in terms of having to account for and validate and become more transparent. And when that happens, I hope the two merge really well and there ends up being a fundamental change.
Yeah, I think you're right. Because from the outside, shipping looks very easy. But once you start digging into it, it's complex. And there are a lot of stakeholders that needs to be on board for something to change.
Yeah, buy-in is the biggest issue for sure. And then just mapping it alone right now. That's what I've been doing in the last few months. And I'm kind of a nerd in that sense of like value chain mapping and stakeholder mapping. I love it because this is such a complex industry that it's been the biggest challenge. I've been in a lot of different sectors, but this one is, I think if there's any formidable adversary, this is it. If shipping can adopt blockchain, then I think truly we have no worries for the rest of the world, that this can happen.
I think that is a compliment to the entire industry.
Good.
And I think we are in the right industry. Thank you very much, Deanna, for taking the time to speak to me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for finding me and reaching out. This has been a great discussion. You don't have them too often in terms of the more overarching pictures. So thank you.
Thank you, Deanna. I think most of the listeners now understand what blockchain is and the exciting future we are entering into now. The Danish Maritime Fund recognizes the importance of blockchain as a platform technology that cuts across many areas of innovation and impact in the transport and logistics sector, and has decided to fund BLOC, BLOC, to establish a global maritime hub for blockchain technology with a focus on thought leadership, proof of concepts, and open collaborative development of maritime and logistics solutions. They will hold a yearly summit in Copenhagen. And if you want to follow BLOC online, they are on Twitter with the Twitter handle at UN_BLOC, UN_BLOC. And there is a website, which is un-bloc.com. Or search for Blockchain Labs for Open Collaboration. This is so interesting. I really hope that you understand that the Danes will create a center of excellence for blockchain within the maritime industry. Think about that. There are so many things happening. And I've been to a short vacation to Spain, so I have a hard time keeping up right now. For my Swedish listeners, I was interviewed on a podcast which was released yesterday. It's Logistikpodden, hosted by P.O. Arnes, who is my next guest. We interviewed each other for an entire day last month. And I got to ask him about all these buzzwords that we in shipping needs to keep an eye on, like blockchain, for instance. You will hear him share his deep knowledge in the next episode, number 63. My last episode with Katja Rasmussen happened to be released the same week as the tool that Maersk is now introducing to their customers, so my episode will be carried by their Twitter and LinkedIn account today. That is exciting for me. Last week I made an appearance on a live radio in the US, talking about the shipping podcast and maritime professionals for a couple of minutes in the Horse Radio Network with Glenn the Geek, which sounds completely nuts to those of you outside the podcasting industry. But you just have to trust me, that is big. I owe my subscribers to my newsletter, a newsletter. Yes, I know I keep talking about it, but now it has to happen. I will set up this podcast on YouTube for more people to find it, and I'm going to set up a page on Patreon. I am a busy bee, my God. I also have to serve my clients and keep them happy so they pay their bills. And I have a 2-year anniversary episode to produce. If you want to be part of that episode and put a question to me about anything you want to know, please let me know. You can either sign up for Voxer, which is an app on your mobile, and vox me your question. Or you can use your mobile to record. There is a voice record app usually installed. You just record your question and email the audio file to me. I am so eager to hear from you. I hope you understand if I sign off now. As you can hear, I have a lot to do. So until the next time, from me to you, over and out. Thank you for listening to the Shipping Podcast. Don't forget to tell everyone that you meet that there is a shipping podcast available and that they should download it and listen to the maritime professionals who are sharing their passion for the shipping industry.